When was the last time you walked into a room and felt the energy shift? When did someone last look at you and truly see you, not just glance past you like your furniture? Why do you fade into the background while others command attention without even trying? What if I told you that your invisibility isn't an accident, but a choice you've been making unconsciously for years? Write, "I will change my mindset now" in the comments if you're ready to stop being invisible and start commanding the presence you deserve. Let me tell you something that will disturb you to your core. You are not invisible because you lack something external. You're invisible because you've trained yourself to disappear. You've spent years perfecting the art of being unremarkable, of blending into the background, of making yourself so small that even you forget you exist. And you've done this not because you're naturally invisible, but because somewhere along the way you learned that being seen was dangerous. Presence is not about being the loudest person in the room, or the most attractive, or the most successful. Presence is about being fully inhabiting your own existence. It's about occupying your space with intention, with consciousness, with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to apologize for it. But most people have never learned to be present, because being present requires something terrifying. It requires you to be vulnerable to being seen. You see, consciousness and presence are intimately connected. When you're truly conscious, fully aware of yourself and your surroundings, you naturally command attention, not because you're trying to, but because conscious beings radiate a quality that unconscious beings find irresistible. It's like a flame in a room full of people who have been sitting in darkness. They can't help but look. But here's what you must understand about time and presence. Every moment you spend trying to be invisible is a moment you can't get back. Every conversation where you fade into the background, every room you enter like a ghost, every opportunity you miss because people don't notice you're there, is time stolen from your potential. Time doesn't wait for you to become brave. Time doesn't pause while you figure out how to be seen. Reality is not neutral. Reality responds to the energy you bring to it. When you show up with weak energy, apologetic posture, and hesitant words, reality treats you accordingly. When you show up with strong energy, confident posture, and clear communication, reality shapes itself around your presence. You are not a passive observer of reality. You are an active participant in its creation. Think about the people who command attention effortlessly. They're not necessarily the most beautiful or the most intelligent or the most accomplished. They're the ones who have learned to be fully present in their own bodies, fully committed to their own thoughts, fully engaged with their own existence. They occupy their space like they have a right to be there. Because they know something you've forgotten, they do have a right to be there. Your invisibility is not a character flaw, it's a defense mechanism. Somewhere in your past, you learned that being seen was dangerous. Maybe you were criticized for being too much, too loud, too confident. Maybe you were punished for taking up space, for expressing your opinions, for existing fully. So you learned to make yourself small, to disappear, to become invisible as a way of staying safe. But what kept you safe as a child is keeping you stuck as an adult. The world doesn't need you to be small. The world needs you to be fully yourself. The people in your life don't need you to disappear. They need you to show up, to be present, to bring your unique energy to every interaction. Let me tell you about a man who lived centuries ago in a small mountain village. This man had a peculiar affliction. He was slowly disappearing, not literally, but in every way that mattered. People would forget his name moments after meeting him. His presence was so weak that he could sit in a room full of people and they would forget he was there. Children would walk through him as if he were a ghost. Even his own reflection seemed to fade a little more each day. The man consulted every doctor, every wise woman, every priest in the village, but no one could help him. They all agreed that physically he was perfectly healthy, but something essential was missing, something that made him real, that made him matter, that made him visible to the world. One day, a stranger came to the village. This stranger had a presence so powerful that conversations stopped when he entered rooms. People turned to look at him not because he was handsome or wealthy or famous, but because he radiated something that drew attention like a magnet. He was fully present, fully alive, fully committed to his own existence. The disappearing man approached the stranger and told him about his condition. The stranger listened carefully, then smiled and said, "You're not disappearing, you're hiding, and I can teach you how to stop." The stranger explained that presence wasn't something you're born with or without. It's something you develop through practice, through conscious choice, through the courage to be seen. He taught the man that visibility isn't about being perfect or impressive. It's about being authentic, about showing up as you really are, instead of as you think you should be. But here's the crucial part of the story. The stranger didn't just give the man techniques or strategies, he gave him a mirror, not a physical mirror but a metaphorical one. He showed the man how to see himself clearly, to recognize his own value, to understand that he had something unique to offer the world. The transformation didn't happen overnight. The man had to practice being present. He had to learn to make eye contact, to speak clearly, to stand with his shoulders back. He had to overcome years of conditioning that told him he was better off invisible. But gradually, miraculously, he began to reappear. People started noticing him in conversations. His name stuck in their memories. His presence became something people could feel and respond to. He wasn't trying to be someone else. He was just being himself, but fully, completely, without apology. This story is your story. You are the disappearing man, and you have been for far too long. You've been hiding in plain sight, making yourself invisible, not through magic, but through the subtle art of self-diminishment. You've been apologizing for your existence instead of celebrating it. But unlike the man in the story, you don't need to wait for a stranger to teach you how to be visible. You can learn this yourself. You can choose to stop hiding. You can decide to occupy your space with intention and confidence. Presence begins with posture. How you hold your body tells the world how you feel about yourself. When you slouch, when you make yourself small, when you avoid eye contact, you're broadcasting insecurity. You're telling everyone around you that you don't think you deserve to be seen. But when you stand tall, when you make eye contact, when you speak clearly and take up appropriate space, you're broadcasting confidence. You're telling the world that you belong here, that you have something valuable to contribute, that you deserve attention and respect. This isn't about arrogance or dominance. This is about self-respect. This is about honoring your own existence enough to make it visible to others. Think about the people who have real presence. They're not aggressive or demanding. They're simply comfortable in their own skin, and that comfort is magnetic. Your voice is another crucial element of presence. When you speak, do you mumble, or do you articulate? Do you speak quickly and nervously, or do you speak with deliberate pace and clear intention? Do you ask questions with your statements, making everything sound uncertain, or do you speak with conviction? The way you speak reflects how you feel about the value of your thoughts and opinions. If you believe what you're saying matters, you'll speak like it matters. If you believe you're worth listening to, you'll speak in a way that commands attention. But if you believe you're just taking up space, you'll speak like you're apologizing for existing. Your energy is perhaps the most important component of presence. Energy isn't just about being excited or animated, it's about being fully engaged with life, fully committed to your own experience. When you're half asleep, going through the motions, mentally absent, people can feel it. They respond to your energy by giving you the same amount of attention you're giving to yourself. But when you're fully present, when you're engaged and alert and committed to the moment, people respond to that energy. They lean in, they pay attention, they want to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you have to say. The disappearing man in our story had to learn that presence isn't about being perfect, it's about being authentic. It's about showing up as you really are, with all your imperfections and uncertainties and unique qualities. People aren't drawn to perfection, they're drawn to authenticity, to realness, to the courage to be vulnerable. This is why some people command attention without being traditionally attractive or successful. They have the courage to be themselves completely, and that courage is irresistible. They don't pretend to be someone they're not. They don't hide their quirks or their flaws. They show up as they are. And their authenticity creates presence. But authenticity requires something most people are afraid to give. It requires you to be vulnerable. It requires you to risk being judged, criticized, or rejected. It requires you to show up without knowing for certain how you'll be received. And your invisible self would rather hide than risk that vulnerability. This is the paradox of presence. The more you try to control how others see you, the less present you become. The more you try to be what you think others want, the less authentic you are. The more you try to avoid judgment, the more you fade into the background. True presence comes from the opposite approach. It comes from being so committed to your own truth that you're willing to be seen clearly, even if that means being seen imperfectly. It comes from caring more about being authentic than about being liked. It comes from understanding that your value doesn't depend on other people's approval. The man in our story learned this lesson through practice. Every day, he would challenge himself to be a little more present, a little more visible, a little more engaged. He would make eye contact with one more person. He would speak up in one more conversation. He would take up a little more space, literally and figuratively. And something amazing happened. The more present he became, the more people wanted to be around him. Not because he was trying to impress them, but because he was finally allowing them to see who he really was. And who he really was, it turned out, was worth seeing. The same is true for you. The real you, the authentic you, the you that exists beneath all the layers of conditioning and fear and self-doubt, is worth seeing. But you've been hiding that person for so long that you've forgotten they exist. You've been presenting a watered-down version of yourself, a version that's safe and acceptable and forgettable. But safety is the enemy of presence. Acceptability is the enemy of authenticity. When you make yourself small enough to avoid criticism, you also make yourself small enough to avoid connection. When you dim your light enough to avoid standing out, you also dim it enough to avoid being seen. The woman who sees you as invisible isn't seeing you as invisible because you're not worthy of attention. She's seeing you as invisible because you're presenting yourself as invisible. You're giving off energy that says you don't want to be seen, that you're not worth noticing, that you'd rather fade into the background. But energy is a choice. Presence is a choice. Visibility is a choice. Every moment, you're choosing how to show up in the world. You're choosing how much of yourself to reveal, how much space to take up, how much energy to bring to each interaction. The tragedy is that most people never realize they're making these choices. They think invisibility is just something that happens to them, that presence is something other people have, and they don't. But presence isn't a gift, it's a skill. It's something you can develop, something you can practice, something you can master. It starts with consciousness. You must become aware of how you're showing up in the world. You must notice when you're making yourself small, when you're apologizing for existing, when you're hiding your true self. And in those moments of awareness, you must choose differently. You must choose to stand a little taller. You must choose to speak a little clearer. You must choose to make eye contact a little longer. You must choose to take up the space you deserve. These are small choices, but they compound over time. They build into something powerful, a presence that cannot be ignored. The stranger in our story told the disappearing man something crucial. You cannot be invisible to others until you first become visible to yourself. This is the heart of the matter. You cannot command presence in the world until you first acknowledge your own worth, your own value, your own right to exist fully. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as someone worth knowing, worth listening to, worth being around? Or do you see yourself as someone who's just taking up space, someone who's lucky to be included, someone who should be grateful for whatever attention they receive? Your self-perception becomes your reality. If you see yourself as invisible, you'll act in ways that make you invisible. If you see yourself as someone with value and presence, you'll act in ways that reflect that value and presence. The world responds to the energy you bring to it, and that energy is determined by how you see yourself. This is why the work of developing presence begins with inner work. You must learn to see yourself clearly, to recognize your own worth, to understand that you have something unique to offer the world. This isn't about arrogance or narcissism. This is about basic self-respect. You must also learn to inhabit your own body fully. Most people live primarily in their heads, disconnected from their physical presence. They're thinking about what they should say, worrying about how they're being perceived, analyzing every interaction. But presence requires you to be in your body, to feel your feet on the ground, to be aware of your breathing, to occupy your physical space with intention. This is why breathing is so important to presence. When you're anxious or insecure, your breathing becomes shallow and restricted. This affects your voice, your posture, your energy. But when you breathe deeply and fully, you ground yourself in your body, you access your power, you become present. The man in our story learned to breathe before entering any room. He learned to feel his feet on the ground, to straighten his spine, to expand his chest. He learned to arrive in his body before arriving in the space, and this simple practice began to transform how others perceived him. But perhaps the most important lesson the man learned was this: presence is not about being perfect, it's about being real. It's about bringing your full self to every interaction, including your uncertainties, your vulnerabilities, your imperfections. People are drawn to authenticity, not perfection. This is why some people have presence even when they're nervous or uncertain. They're not hiding their nervousness. They're not pretending to be confident when they're not. They're simply being honest about their experience. And that honesty creates connection. That connection creates presence. You don't need to be the most interesting person in the room to command attention. You don't need to be the most attractive or the most successful. You just need to be the most present. You need to be the person who's fully engaged with the moment, fully committed to the interaction, fully available to the experience. This means putting away your phone when you're with people.
It means listening fully, instead of planning what you'll say next. It means asking questions because you're genuinely curious, not because you're trying to impress. It means being where you are, instead of wishing you were somewhere else. The disappearing man discovered that presence is magnetic, not because it's loud or demanding, but because it's rare. In a world full of people who are half present, distracted, going through the motions, someone who is fully present stands out like a lighthouse in the fog. They don't have to try to get attention. Attention comes to them naturally, but developing presence requires courage. It requires the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, to risk rejection. It requires the courage to take up space, to speak your truth, to exist fully. And your invisible self has been protecting you from that courage for years. The time has come to stop hiding. The time has come to step into your full presence, to occupy your space with intention, to show up as you really are. The world is waiting for what you have to offer, but first you must offer it. You must stop apologizing for existing, and start celebrating your existence. The woman who sees you as invisible isn't the problem. The problem is that you've been presenting yourself as invisible. You've been broadcasting energy that says you don't want to be seen, that you're not worth noticing, that you'd rather fade into the background. But you can change that energy. You can choose to show up differently. Start today. Start with your posture. Stand like you have a right to be here. Start with your voice. Speak like your thoughts matter. Start with your energy. Bring full engagement to every interaction. Start with your presence. Be where you are, instead of wishing you were somewhere else. The transformation won't happen overnight. The disappearing man had to practice being visible every day. He had to overcome years of conditioning that told him he was better off invisible. But gradually, consistently, he began to reappear. And the same can happen for you. You are not condemned to invisibility. You are not destined to fade into the background. You are not meant to be overlooked, ignored, or forgotten. You are meant to be seen, to be known, to be valued. But first you must value yourself enough to be visible. Clean up your life. Stand up straight. Speak clearly. Make eye contact. Take up space. Be present. Be authentic. Be real. Be you, fully and completely, without apology. The world is waiting for you to show up. The people in your life are waiting for you to be present. The opportunities are waiting for you to be visible, but you must choose to be seen. You must choose to exist fully. You must choose to stop being invisible and start commanding the presence you deserve. If you're ready to stop being invisible and start developing magnetic presence, write "I will change my mindset now" in the comments. Let this be your declaration that you're done hiding, done apologizing for existing, done fading into the background. The time for invisibility is over. The time for presence is now.